back to Soothing Saturday, where we kick up our training shoes and drink the blood of our enemies. I'm Shifu Pain, and when it comes to weapons found in video games, it's often tricky to find ones that are truly iconic or recognizable.
But for how iconic they are, how do these weapons actually stack up when compared to actual martial standards and practices? What are historical precedents, comparable artifacts and styles?
We've done this sort of topic before when we took a look at the iconic weapons of the Star Wars franchise, how the lightsaber and its subsequent forms stack up to actual martial law and, well, style. A trend we continue today as we take a look at the Ghost of Sparta, as well as his iconic weapons throughout his game franchise. Now, as a quick confession, I was actually originally going to look at the Leviathan Axe from the 2018 game, and look at axe use in battle. But let's be honest here. Axes are not quite as interesting to talk about as these monstrosities. First, let's break down the Blades of Chaos to determine what it actually is that we're dealing with.
On the face, we have two swords, shorter than a conventional sword. The overall length from the 2018 version is 49 centimeters or 19.3 inches, with the blade itself measuring 30 centimeters or 11.82 inches.
Well, that's short.
30 centimeters is the length of a conventional ruler, making the Blades of Chaos less swords and more like daggers.
Well, actually, as it turns out, this sword length is actually quite consistent with the common swords used by Spartans at that sort of time.
The Xiphos, which was on average the length of 18 to 24 inches or 45 to 60 centimeters, although by the Greco-Persian Wars, Spartans would prefer 30 centimeter blades, much like the Blades of Chaos, making them the ideal weapon of choice for a Spartan military leader.
See, that sort of length of weapon is ideal for closer combat, but what about more ranged attacks? What would someone with a Xiphos do if they were up against someone with a spear? That would be the right time, I think, to call on something like a shield, or if we want to be edgy, chains!
To be specific, the chains are attached at the end of the hilt and wrapped around the forearms. You would think that would limit movement of the blades in motion, possibly cut off circulation if the blades are pulled too tightly? Well, I guess not. Immediately, this gives connotations towards the chain whip, with the chain and the pointy thing at the end. But in the games, the chain portion is more often used to give length to an attack and give the possibility for longer reaching, more sweeping attacks.
I mean, unless we see Kratos do this in the next game. Okay, so putting that aside, was the chain whip or anything similar used in actual battle?
Well, the only written evidence I could find was an account in Soft Weapons, 9-section whip, and rope dart. No bias there then. The chain whip, or the 9-section whip, was used during the Jin dynasty of between 265 and 420.
But I don't know, it seems kind of fishy.
While I've never personally practiced the weapon, from what I gather it takes longer to learn and becomes harder to control the more sections it has. Not to mention that in a chaotic, messy context of a battlefield, simplicity would be more appropriate than this.
Question. Why not just stab them?
Sure, the chain whip is preserved today as a training tool, a part of culture and history, but would not be a go-to for battle.
Okay, so the chain part is kind of a bust, and the less said about the physics of these weapons in the games, the better. But what about the actual blades themselves, and more importantly, the fact that there are two of them?
As previously mentioned, the blades are approximately 49 centimeters long, with the blade being 30 centimeters. That is a short weapon, already sacrificing range, necessitating the chains, and without requiring a closer combat style. As already stated, the blades on their own could have trouble against a spear or a longer sword, where the opponent has the reach advantage, without even accounting for if they have a shield. Does that then mean that the Blades of Chaos, although looking cool, are actually totally ineffective? Well, that's where we get to the fact that there are two of them, comparing them to another style of combat with dual weapons. Let's say the twin broadswords. How do they stack up?
So, what is the main advantage of having two swords over just the one sword? Well, for one thing, if you have just the one sword, sure, you can bring it over here to have a defensive stance, but if you have two, then while you're doing that defensive stance, you can then go back in with another with an attacking. And if you have both, you can go in for a combination with both and attack two areas at once. So you have that as an advantage if you have two swords as advantage, as opposed to if you just have the one. But then the thing is, that how does that compare with having, say, a sword and a shield? Well, that's where we come into the main problem, and that is, while with two swords you have great attack and you have great offensive ability, I'm afraid
your defense is shit. If you compare having two swords to a sword and a shield, quite frankly, a sword and a shield has equal parts offense and defense, whereas two swords, that's just all offense. Now, as I said before, if you have two swords, sure, you can defend with that sort of block like that. But that's not really covering a lot, is it? That's not really a lot of cover you've got there. You basically got... That's the same amount of area as, I don't know, twig. Whereas a shield, that has a lot more area that can cover a lot more of your important bits. And by that same token, you have then that same ability to cover with the shield, come in with an attack. I don't have a shield with me right now to demonstrate, but you get the idea.
Maybe that's why Kratos got the Sun Shield for the 2018 game. He finally realised his defense was shit.
But then again, let's add the chains back in and say that Kratos or someone had the adequate time to get used to and adequately practice with the weapons. How would that affect the defense or offense? As already mentioned, it would create a reach advantage, plus serve for longer and shorter ranged attacks, as we have seen Kratos pull people closer to him for a more intimate attack. And what about defense? Well, on this we run into the same problem of a lack of adequate cover, but when looking again at the dual broadswords and their martial stylings, we come across something. It's commonly the practice to be light on the proverbial foot, attack quickly, moving with great agility, dodging attacks more than blocking them, which, when accounting for the chains, also makes sense. A common move is for Kratos to use the blades as a grappling tool, to swing, climb and pull across objects and terrain.
Could this lend to defensive ability? Yes. If you completely ignored physics, yes.
And there we have the main problem. Sure, if we have the blades on their own, paired with, say, a shield, or even on their own, sure, they might be able to withstand as some sort of average weapon. But the problem is that when we add in that mechanic of these chains, and the whole thing just falls apart. It adds nothing in terms of defensive ability, and sure, maybe it adds in some offensive ability, but if it takes so long to learn and so long to get used to, and is not really adding any sort of advantage, and let's not even talk about how it basically causes the laws of motion to vomit, then really they add nothing in. Even if we compare the blades to something of a sizable size comparison, like the Sai for example, and disregard the chains, they don't add any advantage in terms of size, in terms of defense. Really, without a shield or anything like that, they're basically flawed. So it seems as though the better combination of weapons is a shield, like the Sun Shield we see in the 2018 game, and something with a bit more heft to it, something with a bit more size, with a bit more of a range. So ironically, it seems that something like the Leviathan Axe we see in the 2018 game, paired with the Sun Shield, is a better weapon combination, adding in both that offense and defense. Yes, it seems once we take away the edge and circumstance of the Blades of Chaos, and it feels weird to say that considering how they're so iconic a weapon in terms of video game weapons, but it seems simplicity outdoes edginess every time.
Thank you for watching this week's video, and in the comments let me know what your predictions are for God of War Ragnarok. Will Kratos receive a new weapon? Will Atreus come even further into his power? How does Tyr fit into all of this? Whatever your predictions or your questions are, or maybe just how excited you are for the next game, let's talk about it in the comment section below. Thank you once again, and until next time everyone, peace be with you.